Good morning. Good morning. My name is Bradley Davis. Thank you for having me today. Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm an artist living in Minneapolis and a father to my son Darwin, who is 15 and goes to Breck. Also here with me today is my wonderful, amazing girlfriend, Mandy. I would like to thank you both for being here. Thanks, Mandy. Thanks, Darwin. Thank you also to Lynette Black for inviting me to show my work. Big shout out to Tom and Caroline, and the rest of the hanging crew. Thank you, Bryce, and Cody, and the rest of the tech team for facilitating this talk. My show title at Plymouth is titled The Fragile Web of Life. It was hand-selected by yours truly, and it is full of paintings reflecting my love and deep respect and understanding of how all life on Earth is interconnected and more fragile than we think due to this complex interdependence. Frogs are in the middle of the planet's overall current ecosystems. They eat lots of insects, and lots of animals in turn eat them. Frogs, as E.O. Wilson said, are the canaries in the coal mine. What happens to them will befall mankind. I've been painting a frog a day in the studio as a meditation and reminder for myself and to raise awareness with others of this poignant and profoundly important truth. I've been painting a frog a day for 3 years now. As with any discussion about nature, this talk would seem silly without a huge shout out and thank you to my parents, the two people who cared about me enough to forward me the opportunity to be out in this wild world, loving nature, doing my best to make sense of this crazy world. Thank you, Mom and Dad, in Boulder and St. Louis. I would like to begin my talk this morning, which will generally encompass the subjects of nature, animals, specifically amphibians, art, and the future, as well as touching upon human nature and our predisposed way of relating to the natural world and ourselves. A lot to deal with and grapple with, so we might as well get started with a bit of poetry. And so a poem from Basho, the famous Japanese master of the haiku. Old pond, frog jumps in, splash. For me, this poem says everything, and please allow me to use it to introduce to you some of my abiding ideas about frogs and nature and human existence, including our consciousness. First of all, the pond is old, just like the earth. It has existed for long enough a time for a highly evolved animal to be sitting there on its edge, happily living its life. This is significant, and as much as the frog's existence is proof of sufficient food around him to have nourished and sustained his body in such a way that he is now healthy enough and aware and smart enough as well to apprehend the visitor approaching the pond, who is the poet writing the poem. The frog is a being awake. Additionally, there is a human present to observe and record the event in language, not just any language, our human language. But let's stick to the frog for now. It is happy, alert, and ready to act and take a leap into the place where it came from. And in fact, in 3 short lines, we witness this very event. And in fact, it is momentous. There's a sound of water splashing, and the frog is no longer on the bank. It has disappeared. Thankfully, in this instance, it has not really disappeared. It has just changed locations. And depending on what species of frog it is that jumped into the water, it will have one of several behaviors upon landing in the water. If I'm guessing, in this instance, it treads a few feet out away from the shore, remaining on the surface of the water to apprehend safely its visitor, in this case, a peaceful poet. So perhaps the next chapter of this poem is worth writing right now and sharing with you. Man walks in nature, apprehends his godliness, the frog's quiet eyes. We are the frog in Basho's poem. We get hot in the sun, and we want to take a swim. We need places with clean enough water to jump in, rivers, oceans, lakes, even ponds. In the poem, we encounter ourselves, and upon becoming present to ourselves, we instinctively flee the scene into the bath or shower to get clean and wash off our dirty conscience. There's a story of a monk who was so peaceful that his cat did not chase mice anymore in their shared room. I wonder if man can walk up to a pond where the frogs know they do not have to flee. What is at stake is honesty and vulnerability. We as human beings must face the truth of our nature. We are animals. We are inclined to go out and explore the world. We do so with the oversight, if we're lucky, of our parents. And in our backpacks, we carry the knowledge they've shared with us. Our response to our natural curiosity depends on what we have been taught. Children are curious. That's a fact. Children wonder at the natural world. They are mesmerized by nature and all the creatures inhabiting natural places. It's not an accident or a coincidence that children are so fascinated by frogs. Frogs embody and contain a special ingredient. They reflect and resonate and vibrate with a particular life force. One I suggest is pure, Dharma body, and by Dharma body I mean pure beauty, innocent truth, the light of God, unadulterated, unfiltered. Which is why I think that Basho's poem is really talking about consciousness, about what we face, the challenge as human beings. When we live our lives, we can jump in and escape or face what greets us in the moment. We are facing calamity of life on earth. In review, in the poem, there's clean water. There's a big, highly evolved animal that has a brain functioning at such a level that it can act in its best interest at a moment's notice. These are all highly esteemed attributes to be cherished by any being. Frogs embody this ability, and inasmuch as they are peaceful, beautiful, graceful, and specific in their preferences, they are very much like the idealized or aspirational human being. Therefore, they could be very good teachers for us. In fact, I think that if we save the frogs, all of the frogs, all 7,000 species of them today on Earth, we will save ourselves, which, as we have seen in recent current events, with the ceaseless war we create by our failure to understand our own consciousness, it is likely that we could better serve ourselves by serving the frogs and serving nature. In fact, it could be our inclination to fight amongst ourselves, which is manifesting itself in the conflagrations that we are causing out in nature. We cannot be with the monsters residing inside ourselves, so we create an inferno without to look at and marvel at the destruction of it. And then we suggest that this is separate from us, that it is something, not us, something that we can watch and observe, The burning forest, however, is actually us. Hence, the profundity of Basho's poem. It is about a frog jumping into a pond and the noise that is made when the animal enters the water. As human beings, we need water. That much is for sure. In thinking about this talk, I was struck by the enormity of requirements we need as animals to survive. And although food is one component of our success, it's mostly water we need. We could all get by a very small fraction of the food we currently have at our disposal, and for that matter, ingest. In fact, there's so much food on Earth for human beings, it's an embarrassment of riches. More about that later. It's mostly water, though, fresh water. All frogs need fresh water. Most amphibians use clean, fresh water to lay their eggs, where their larvae begin to metamorphose to climb up onto land. Without water, amphibians disappear. Without water, human beings disappear. We love water. Look at the way we have occupied the land on Earth, which incidentally is only 25% of the surface of the Earth. We crowd, literally crowd, and build high-rises along every stretch of water available. We put our cabins stacked side by side along lake shores. We are so similar to frogs, perhaps the very common repugnance found in human beings toward amphibians and reptiles is they cannot be with that part of themselves which the animal reflects back at them. So back to the Basho poem. Old pond, frog jumps in, splash. The old pond is the earth. The frog is us, and our activity and the splash is open for interpretation. It can be a beautiful, delightful, refreshing sound of summer, where we take a dip at a country lake and rejoice, or it equally can be the sound of the end, the apocalypse. It all depends on what kind of action we take. All of us in this room are smart enough to know what the French existentialists said is true, that the essence of the human spirit, the only essence that distinguishes us as animals, is action. Which brings me to my artwork. I was fortunate to be given everything in life. I had every opportunity I could ever dream of, and realizing in an early age that this privilege does not come often, I thought long and hard about what I wanted to do with my life and how I could best make a difference. From an early age, I knew that my dharma had something to do with nature. I could not escape the pull of nature wherever I was. I was lifting up stones, looking for worms or crickets, or exploring creeks, searching for new types of plants along the bank, of scanning the sky as shadows crossed the ground to determine what kind of bird of prey was up above and what it was doing. In affording myself the opportunity to immerse myself in nature, my humility as a human being grew. And soon I realized nature was the most generous teacher, offering us the most beautiful grace and the most intricate complexities and simultaneous simplicity. Nature taught me to embrace paradox and give up any notion of ever figuring everything out, because the quest to discover the truth for me became the meaning of life. The truth is, there was more for me in pondering my path ahead. In pondering what to do with my gifts and deliberating the course to set, I realized that human beings are running the show to some degree. And I implicitly knew from an early age that human beings were blind to an essential component of reality, namely their ability to be happy. Everywhere I looked, I saw evidence for wasted lives that were impoverished by resignation, complacency, sour malevolence. And in as much as this condition was prevalent, I noticed a common thread running through these tired souls, and that is that they denied their own heritage. They were cut off from nature. E.O. Wilson wrote a great book called biophilia, in which he makes the case that our happiness depends on our bond with nature. And importantly, the more that we know and discover and learn about nature, the more we can encourage this bond with ourselves, for ourselves with the natural world. In fact, he says the more we know about nature, the more we cannot help but love it. Loving takes time, hard work, and patience, commitment and motivation. From a purely hedonistic standpoint, we could go out and be pleasure seekers and live as if love did not matter. The problem here is that we all have to die. That is the rule for all things that live. What lives must die. And because of the nature of our consciousness, the way it is constructed, it is such that we are always hedging against our fears, that which we think may be true, that we do not want to face. In this case, we must face that we are, in fact, the problem in nature. A problem because we have not taken the time to properly orient ourselves here in this world, the modern, bustling, developing world, which is sitting atop the pulpy, green flesh of plants and ants and fish and currents. All that we have, every last device, every last machine, every last building, every component of a computer, chip, every medicine we put into our mouths, all of it, and then 100 times more than that, we don't even know what we're unaware of, we owe to nature. We owe everything to nature. Just like as children, we owe everything to our parents. Without them in this hostile world, we would perish almost immediately, unless we were raised by wolves. Nature is our heritage. Nature is where we will go in the end. It is like the Buddhist void. That same frog on the edge of the pond in Basho's poem crawled out of the water. He will go back there, and time goes on and on and on. What is important is that we take care of the pond, and we take care of ourselves, our bodies, our minds. Frogs, for me, are a symbol of life on earth, a symbol of our consciousness, a symbol of how fragile and interconnected everything is all the time. Our thoughts are linked to our actions are linked to the built environment. The built environment will determine whether nature can thrive or not. In the current iteration, nature is not thriving. On the contrary, it is being destroyed. So, we must change our thoughts and build our own courage, a new consciousness, and accept the current state of the world and humanity. That is the first thing we must get really clear, that human beings, when left to their own devices, will go forward blindly, sleeping until the pond disappears. That is the sad truth. We must save the frog pond. We must build the frog pond. We must plant native plants around that frog pond and encourage insects. We must protect the insects. All these environmental ideas are great. The only rub is that when they are presented to a low vibration consciousness, they seem absurd. One way of raising consciousness in the vibration level of human beings is to meet them where they are, accept them just as they are, and be with them just as they are, however that may be. In this instance, it may be in their glorious ignorance of all things to do with nature, especially regarding amphibians and reptiles. Once this relationship of acceptance has been established, we introduce to their consciousness, hence the subject of my art. Frog is the possibility of nature existing in harmony alongside the noise of humanity. Frog is the possibility of cleaning up after ourselves, because there are others who use this space. Frog is the possibility of biodiversity. Frog is the possibility of protecting the smallest things inside this huge, monstrous industrial system because we can, because we have the eyes to see the frog. And if we can't see it, we know that our children can. And when our children stop seeing frogs, our children are diminished. Their joy is not the same as ours was in our childhood, and our children will wonder less. If there are no frogs, if children stop wondering, we don't know what the ripple effect into the greater consciousness will be. Frog is the possibility of stewardship, the possibility we will redeem our legacy today. We will stand on the shoulders of all the hard work handed to us in the form of new scientific knowledge. What Charles Darwin gave us was a key to unlock the door to our bright future of life on Earth. We must not lose the key. Frog is the possibility of ecology. I was lucky enough to go to art school in Bath, England, a beautiful ancient valley known for its healing waters flowing through lush and green, verdant and Edenic. At some point, the Romans arrived and built the iconic Roman baths, which gives the town its current name. In fact, when I was in art school, I studied primarily in the Gainsborough building, named after a famous English painter known for his landscapes of the English countryside and portraiture of the upper class. And across the street from the Gainsborough building, the city of Bath was building a new bathhouse. I would scavenge materials from the gigantic dumpsters that served and serviced the building site, which was a huge production. I painted on scraps of metal, pieces of glass, used plastic and wood in my sculptures. All of the waste from this project I used in my artwork during art school. Among many other impressions at the time, I was shocked by the profligacy of this new construction project. Around the corner at the original hot baths, tourists abounded every day of the year, and when our class visited the site, I was struck by an old stone carving of a sun incorporating symbolism of the Druids. Under the sun was a carving of an owl, as well as a little frog, and when shown together, the caption said they indicated a healthy ecosystem. The owl and the frog, sitting low and sitting high, understand the world. We must, as human beings, abide by our own consciousness as instructed by our own human inclinations and observations of our own direct experience, as well as borrowing and leaning into the instructions given to us by nature. And now I will read a passage, in fact, the final passage of Charles Darwin's The Origin of Species. It is interesting to contemplate a tangled bank closed with many plants of many kinds, with birds singing in the bushes, with the various insects flooding about, and with worms crawling through the damp earth, and to reflect that these elaborately constructed forms, so different from each other and dependent upon each other in so complex a manner, have all been produced by laws acting around us. These laws, taken in the largest sense, being growth with reproduction inheritance, which is almost implied by reproduction, variability from the indirect and direct action of the conditions of life, and from use and disuse, a ratio of increase so high as to lead to a struggle for life. And as a consequence to natural selection, entailing divergence of character, and the extinction of less improved forms, thus, from the war of nature, from famine and death, the most exalted object which we are capable of conceiving, namely the production of the higher animals, directly follows there is a grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers, having been originally breathed by the Creator into a few forms or into one, and that whilst this planet has gone cycling on, according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. What Charles Darwin is getting at here is what all great thinkers about nature have pondered, and is something to consider in light of our discussion of the fragile web of life, and that is that the Earth is roughly 4.5 billion years old, and life began about 3.5 billion years ago. Consider 3.5 billion years of being born and dying, coming into existence and going out of existence in accordance with the above rules elucidated by the greatest thinker of all time. 3.5 billion years is how long it took for us to get here in this room today. 3.5 billion years is how long it took the just over 100 species of frogs and toads of North America to be here on Earth today. Most of life, as we know it here on Earth, has persisted and triumphed in the face of great challenges, great storms. A singular frog is a miracle. Its uniqueness is something to behold and marvel. Looking through the lens of grandeur that Charles Darwin described, we should all be so lucky to be with these heroes, these winners of life, these champions who deserve our enormous respect, devotion, care, and now our careful stewardship. Just like we would look after our own newborn grandchild with tenderness and love, something perhaps apart from the love of a mother, burdened with sleepless nights and demands of her physical body, we can look at nature as being our grandchild. We no longer have the tension and the drama that is built up inside of the close quarters of a nuclear family inside the walls of a tumultuous house, such as our ancestors did, dealing with the trials and tribulations of not understanding, of feeling vulnerable to predation by creatures in the night, of being at the mercy, of being in continual darkness, of misunderstanding. We now have the light of science. We have all the protection we need to keep ourselves safe. Now we must protect what we once feared. But in the end is nature, which in the end, it's really ourselves. Returning to ourselves. Our own inner light and transcendental nature, our big brains, our huge capacity for compassion, as well as understanding, we have everything we need now. So I suggest that our journey into the new realm of our new era of restoration of stewardship is more like diving off a cliff rather than walking in the shallows to immerse ourselves for a swim. It can be immediate, swift, inspiring, enlivening, something to connect us all, to rejoice. In college, I studied psychology with the best and the brightest minds in the world. I learned what stubborn creatures human beings are inclined to be, and how, even when we are wrong, and we know that we are wrong, we can persist and spend our lives defending ourselves just to be right, even though we're wrong, and we know it. I also learned that we have dual instincts inside of us, both selfish and altruistic. And from my study of nature and psychology, I'm clear that in the end, the altruistic communities have the advantage. If the world is our community, we must live within it in an altruistic way. Altruism for our grandchildren and their grandchildren. Altruism for the trees. Altruism for the rivers. Altruism for the future of our thriving cities. This brings me to a final point about nature. I always suggest to people who are curious about me and how it came to be that I know so much about nature. And I say, if you want to understand anything in nature, first, take a look at what that animal eats. Then look at what eats that animal and study all of that in order to gain an appreciation of how that animal gets its living and what the future looks like for that animal. The same could be said about plants, and that's not my area of expertise. However, if we look at human beings and our wild success beyond the imagination of any other creature known to science, we have come to dominate the earth in a commanding way, definitively. Our population has doubled since the mid-1900s. In nature, that would be a red flag for a crash. When the deer population rises too precipitously, there aren't enough leaves, tree leaves, for them to eat in their given forest region. And in the deep winter, they don't have enough to eat, and they starve to death. Here on Earth, we have to be more conscious about what we eat. As human beings, we have the distinct advantage to be able to choose what we eat. In nature, we could be described as generalists, which is one of the reasons why we're so successful. We can eat anything. We have to be mindful that we are the deer in the forest. We have to tend the forest according to our growing population. Currently, with roughly 8 billion people to feed, which we do or don't, according to where we live, famine still exists. And obesity affects over 50% of Americans. We are out of balance, not just in how much we eat, but more importantly, what we are choosing as our food. Back to water. The experts will say that water is the only resource that will really matter in the future. We grow our food with water, fresh water. When this resource becomes scarce, just as we do when we're starting to run out of money in our bank account, we only buy the bare necessities at the grocery store, like beans and rice. When water becomes scarce, we will grow what we can with that scarce amount of water to feed ourselves. Now is that time. Our bank account is low, lower than ever before in the Holocene. We must curb our appetites for animal-based foods such as cheese and fish and meat. We have food like beans and vegetables to eat aplenty. We do not have enough money in the bank to be eating meat anymore. Lest we forget the 3 billion more human mouths yet to be born before our population will likely level off. We cannot afford it, nor can nature. 90% of rainforest destruction to date, 90% has been caused by animal agriculture. Animal agriculture, thus, sadly and simply, could be said to be the principal cause, up until now, of the diminishing and currently crashing biodiversity on Earth. Biodiversity loss is the third most important crisis we face in the world today. The biggest crisis is climate change. The second biggest crisis is running out of fresh water. And the third is biodiversity crash. Given that animal agriculture is a huge part of climate change and a factor of running out of water, it is the one thing that we can each change immediately. And we vote with our mouth 3 times a day. If you love nature and your eyes are open, you must stop eating animal products. It's just too costly for everything that we love as nature lovers. We must first accept in ourselves that we are turning a blind eye to the truth. Just as my grandfather, smoking cigarettes to the end, only to eventually die of cancer. And by the way, he drove a tank in Germany in World War II. He was Jewish. We must kick our habits. No one will do it for us. In fact, quite the contrary. There are huge, huge, huge profits at stake to keep this train moving on the same track it currently is on. The inertia is real, people. Newton was not just a town in Massachusetts. Remember, an object in motion stays in motion unless acted upon by an outside force. The inertia of where we are coming from will only bring us to doom. Inertia is our enemy. The possibility of our own health and vitality out in the community by eating a plant-based diet gives us the good fortune and grace to do what nature does: live efficiently, happily, and raise our own family and teach them well. It's hard to teach your kids about anything when you're recovering from a heart attack or worrying about your blood pressure or your imminent stroke. Heart disease is the leading cause of death in the United States of America today, 2024. Heart disease is caused by the ingestion of animal products. Animal products use a ton of water. They, the growers, big corporate industrial entities, are being handed out free water by the government. They are being subsidized, and their products are being sold at a cut rate and being fed to the children in the inner cities of our country. A double cheeseburger at McDonald's when it's on promotion is $1. Consider that. Now consider that it takes the same amount of water to make those 2 patties of beef as a human being would need to shower for 2 months. Wouldn't we all love our water bill for 2 months to be $1? And then think of all the times we've turned off the faucet while brushing our teeth to conserve water. We must act in accordance to the truth and with regard for real science, especially as it pertains to wild nature here on Earth today. It takes 1,600 gallons to produce 1/4 of a pound of beef. There are people in the world standing with containers in places where the trickle takes many, many, many minutes to fill their container. And there's a line behind them. Ironically, these vulnerable human beings standing in lines to get their water may very well be the only current stewards of our rainforests today, the only ones standing between the saw and the trees. They are the boots on the ground. This is Earth. We are humans. We are all humans. We are all connected. We are all the stewards of the fragile web of all of life on Earth. Finally, the frogs are fragile like us. They need water and land. Like us, they are just here, and they just are. Like us, they are beautiful. Like us, they have the capacity to be peaceful members of the community. Like us, they are in the middle of something profoundly beautiful and complex, the interdependent web of life, the fragile crucible of biodiversity on Earth today. The frogs are heroes of evolution. We can be heroes too. Thank you. And please take a minute to read this beautiful quote. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Brad. Wow. I'm just glad we're all here. I wish our whole church, I wish our whole community were here to have heard this. You spoke obviously to our minds, but also really deeply to our hearts and to our spirits. It was wonderful. And we have maybe 5 minutes or so for some questions. If you have, and Brad, would you be kind enough to repeat back, since folks that are streaming?
Of course.
Would like to hear too.
Absolutely.
Any questions for Brad?
Yeah.
Did you do a selection of
Great question. So the question was my selection of the frog a blinding flash, or was it a evolution? Love that question. It was very much an evolution. So when I started painting, it was in New York City, in Manhattan, and I just loved painting. So I would find stuff in the streets and paint on, pieces of board and whatever I could scavenge. And primarily, in the beginning, it was abstract painting, like lots of colorful kind of compositions. And then as I became sort of more responsible about my life, I thought, well, hey, this isn't going to last long. I need to sort of say something and not have it be an indulgent enterprise. So I sort of honed in on my true love, which is animals, which is life on Earth. And then even finer still than that, during the pandemic, I started saying, hey, look, what really matters? And then that was kind of when I became, in painting, there's a lot of like symbolism. So like in religious painting, you might not understand what you're looking at, but at the time they did, because this sort of blue bird meant something very specific. So for me, the frog symbolizes life on Earth, and not just life on Earth, the fragility and beauty and mystery of life on Earth.
Was the haiku part of the selection?
The haiku, was that part of, like, basho, or? I kind of incorporated that because it was relevant, and I also love, to be sort of poetic about how we are as human beings. We can't just kind of directly go to the solution of anything. We'll stumble and fail. We want to have a diagonal route into the magic. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for your question. Any other questions?
What are you painting now? What type of focus are you engaging in?
Yeah, thanks, Bryce. The question is what am I painting now, and what kind of focus am I engaging in? And the answer is that currently, as I have for almost 3 full years now, every day, without fail, still painting a frog a day in a small format, usually 8 by 8 is my traditional like canvas, and then sometimes if I'm running out of materials, I'll cut up paper, and so they can be as small as like a 1/2-inch square, these little frogs. And they can be actually sort of, hard for me to, I've got to be like, my dad was a surgeon. He retired, and he had very steady hands, and when I'm doing these little ones, I'm thinking, I would have been a very good surgeon. But but then more recently, like in the sort of last month or so, I've had a couple other shows, and I have really delighted in the sort of larger format, and then the branching out into taking a break from the frog. And, as you can see out there, that diptych is meant to be together with the sort of, it was kind of earth. So Matisse, a famous French painter, and I used to go to the MoMA a lot in New York, and would see the dance, which was divided in, bisected in blue and green. And that was a very strong influence on me, as kind of speaking to the possibility that human beings on Earth, we can all work together. And there's just that moment where the hands are almost touching in that circle, where we can all connect and be harmoniously loving with each other. And it's like that, but it's not. And so for me, like using that format, I kind of oriented myself with these murals, and then chose important animals. Like the wolf is a keystone species, meaning that so many relationships in nature depend on the wolf. So without us knowing, I always talk about like, everyone thinks wolves eat deer and that's it. Well, no, mainly they eat beaver, and they eat other rodents, and they scavenge, and they eat berries, and they do eat deer, and they eat the weak, or the part of the herd that's that's kind of getting sick, and they clean nature. So when we remove wolves because of our fear, and then most importantly, we have been removing wolves because of what we do. We farm the land for huge profit, and then we get big egos about how big our ranch is in Montana, and we extirpate these important animals on our land because they predate our cattle. Well, if you look at the money, just the money that is changing hands in those transactions, and you listen to a rancher crying about their plight, you will never have honest sympathy for what's actually happening again, because they're making money and looking like a victim. They're taking money for like one cow that goes missing, and the wolves are being slaughtered, and people like it. They like, just like, sadly, we sort of like to, we like to exert our force and show our power, our military power, and we do so at our own peril because, when we destroy, it's not an actual solution. So with love, we can gain a better understanding of how to manage ourselves and the world.
Thanks again. I think the presentation was just marvelous. It was like a long poem to me. And then Mandy, the visuals were just fantastic to incorporate together. It was a great, great presentation. Thanks again, Brad, and stay around, say hello, and we'll see you all next month at